G'day Trailblazers, my name is Cam, and for today's video, I'm going to show you the brand new AMPscript function released in the Salesforce Marketing Cloud Summer 23 release, the BuildRowSetFromJSON AMPscript function. I'm going to show you how it works so you can start to use it for yourself in your emails and landing pages. The AMPscript BuildRowSetFromJSON function allows us to now use JSON payloads in AMPscript, bringing it in line with server-side JavaScript and GTL. You can find the release notes on the Summer 23 release page, and on our left-hand side menu here, in our developers section, we have our brand new AMPscript function, which can take us directly to our documentation page. You can click on the link. We can also find this on the Marketing Cloud documentation page for AMPscript. And here's the syntax for our brand new function to build row set from JSON. Now, similar to the build row set from XML and build row set from string, there are a few ordinals to consider as we build out this function. The first ordinal we'll be using is the JSON string to pass. The second ordinal will be a JSONPath argument. That is the syntax we use to address the JSON string to identify where we start to build our row set from. The third ordinal is allowing us to put a 0 or 1 flag to return an empty row set in case there's an error. If you put a 1 in this ordinal, it means it will return an empty row set and not cause your function to fail. With that, let's have a look at the sample code. Scrolling down, we have a few examples of how we can use the code. To start with, they've used on the sample page here a flights JSON payload. They call the function using a flights example here. So we start our JSON row set build from the flights section of this JSON payload. You can see here is flights, so here are the rows to be assessed. Perfect. The second example, they've used the same JSON again, this time specifying the price. So we're using price as our row set build, which means our rows will only contain the price attribute. So it will just contain this attribute, this one here, and the third one of this payload. So the best way to try it for ourselves is to jump into Marketing Cloud and start testing. So for today, when we jump into Marketing Cloud, I'm going to build a test page to build this up quickly. So I jump into Marketing Cloud and jump into my test collection. Let's build ourselves a brand new content landing page. I'll call this one my testing page for today. I'll go next and choose a blank page and go save. Now while that's building, I'm going to jump into Content Builder as well. And in Content Builder, I'm going to go and create myself a brand new content block. This content block is going to be a HTML content block. So go Content Block Create HTML. I go Cam Testing as my test copy here. I'm just going to go save the content block and call this one my Cam Test Block. And when I save this content block, I'm going to get myself a content block ID. I go back, you can see there it is there. I click into that content block. There is my content block ID. I'm going to copy that block ID, go back into my cloud page, and now my cloud page code here, I can scroll down, I can put in my new AMPscript. Now I'm going to do a little trick here, which allows us to do some rapid development. So I go %% equals, I'm going to do content block by ID, and open the brackets. So I can see the browse context is popping up here. I'll use my double quotes to put in the content block ID, which is that one there, close my brackets and end my function. Now this cloud page is going to reference directly my AMPscript that I'm going to have inside my HTML code block. So I'll go schedule and publish to save my page. Hopefully I see the words Cam Testing. Hopefully, yes we do, perfect. So now when I publish my cloud page, I'll get my URL link, which I can click on. And so I can go click, open my link, and here's my cloud page, which means as I test my AMPscript, I can go into Content Builder, I can modify my HTML block and go Cam Testing 2, save my block quickly and jump straight back to my cloud page, press F5, and then my code is refreshed. Perfect. So with our rapid development platform ready to go, let's start testing the brand new function. I'll jump into our AMPscript documentation here, and let's start copying down some information. To start with, we need to get our syntax here for the JSON payload. So let's copy that and we'll dump that into our content block. We also want the function that calls it. So I'll jump down here and get this example function here, copy that and jump back into my content block. Now to do this in AMPscript, I'm going to try and make it a bit neater. So as we do our AMPscript block, I'm going to try and bring all this JSON code onto one line so it's a bit easier to read. So I'll quickly go through and format this code block up by removing all those empty spaces, making it all on one line. Now you may notice that in each of these JSON attributes here, they have been declared using double quotes, which means when I declare this one as a AMPscript function, by doing my %% and square brackets open, I'm going to want to set this as my JSON value, When I do this, I can't just leave it as an open object. It's not just like JavaScript. I will have to declare this as a string. And since the double quotes have been used, I'll have to use single quotes. So I'll go single quote to open. There's my JSON, and then single quote to close. And there we are, end of the line. With that done, I can then close off my AMPscript code block, just like that. Let's also make an output. So I'll go output, and I'll do %% equals v. So I can have my output function ready to go once I've got my value declared. So with that done, here is our BuildRowSetFromJSON example function. Let's take this function up now and put it inside our code block to start to play with it. Of course, we are going to be building a row set from this function. So to start things off, let's go set at rows. A good variable to use as we build our row set. So we're going to build a row set from what? Well, from our variable called JSON. I've called mine JSON as well, so perfect. It's going to use the flights address as I did in the example code here. So hopefully we should start our addressing for our rows from the flights object, which is all this section here. Now inside this section, we're expecting to see what? Well, it's going to have 1, 2, 3 rows ideally with 3, 3, 4 columns. Okay, that should be what we see from our row set. So we can test it out now ourselves by leaving the JSONPath value, leaving it as returning a null set if there is an error. So we can leave this as it is. We now have our rows returned. Let's test to see how many rows we get back. So we'll go set at row count to be equal to row count. Let's count how many rows we get from the rows variable. I'll then output the row count value. So our output of row count will be what? Let's try it out. We'll go save and refresh our cloud page, and hopefully we find our output of row count is 3. We found 3 rows in that sample JSON payload. Okay, that's what we expected. 1 object, 2 object, 3 objects, 3 rows found. Perfect. So we have confirmed there are 3 rows in our sample JSON payload. We don't want the row count of our data, we want the data contained within. So to make some more functions to try and get back the data within those rows. So within our row count, we've now confirmed there's 3 rows. Let's now get back one of those values. Let's try for the first ordinal, the origin ordinal, within our data. So what we can do is we can say set at value is going to be equal to what? Well, if we're using a row count function, that means there are rows. And to address our rows, we can use the rows function and the field function. So to start with, we have to, of course, get the row. So the row is going to be what? Well, it's from the object of rows. We're going to get back the first row for now. Just the first row, which should be, hopefully, this one here. Now, we can also wrap our rows function inside the field function. So we can say field. That's the field of what? Well, it's from this row. And what field do we want? Well, if we return back the first field in this row, we should get IND. The second field should be NYC, and third should be 100. So let's try the first field and hopefully get back IND. So go 1 and close off our value function. So let's now try it out by printing our value function, which is the field row number 1 of our rows built from row set, with the field being the first ordinal. So we'll try it out by pasting our output to be outputting value. Go save in our rapid development tool here, jump back onto our page and press F5, and hopefully we see value is IND. Great. Jump back on here, let's try our second ordinal, which should be NYC. So we'll change this value to a 2, and go save, go back to our cloud page and refresh, and hopefully it's NYC. NYC, perfect. And just for good measure, we'll jump back onto our page and do one more, and hopefully we see the number 100. Save and refresh. Perfect, 100. So we have confirmed those values coming through, which means we have managed to recreate this first row of our sample data on the example page here. Perfect. But we're not done just yet. We do want the other values to come back too. So let's try and recreate this table from our documentation on our cloud page. So we can see our table is going to have the headers, and it's going to contain those 3 rows with those 4 values pasted within. So to do this, we'll have to employ a few more functions, including our beloved loop function. So from our build row set from rows, we have, of course, our rows value, which contains all the rows from our JSON payload. What we can do is make some space, and let's start to build out a for loop. So we'll say for our value of I being equal to 1, our first row, until, or to, some value, we are going to do something. And then of course we're going to cycle through and do the next value. Cycle back to the top of the rows and do the second row and then the third. But from 1 until what number? We know it's 3. We could hard code the number 3 in here, or instead we could say it's actually going to be the row count of those rows, which we proved earlier was 3. We can take that value and make that our 2 value, just like that. So now we have our for loop, which will cycle through 3 times. 1, 2, 3 for our payload here. Now cycling through the rows is not enough. Of course, we can get back our values on these ordinals 1, 2, 3. We want to get back all 4 values. So before we start to cycle through our rows, we're going to build out that table so we can start to populate those values in one by one as we cycle through those rows. So to make our table, we're going to have to break our AMPscript code block by ending it just there, before we start it again below. Now in this break, we can put in our HTML for table. So we can say table, and to make things easier, I'll say table with a border of 1, so we can see it, of course. Now our table is going to have a header, so we can say in our table row at the top, we're going to use a table header. Our table headers are going to be what? What's our example values? Here are the values from our JSON payload. So back on our cloud page, these are our values to put in. We'll store them down here. We're going to have origin to start with. That's our first table header. And there is 1, 2, 3, 4. So origin, destination, the price per bag, and of course the surcharge. Okay, oops, sorry, the per bag surcharge, I believe it was. Perfect. So that's going to be our table header. Now our table does not end there though, it's actually going to end at the very bottom of our function here, just like that. Between the table starting and closing is our AMPscript code, our for loop, to cycle through each of these 3 rows. So with our table at the top done, we can now start to write out what's going to happen for each row in our JSON payload. First thing we have to do, of course, with our brand new row here, our first row that we cycle through our row count, is to start printing our table row. So what we can do is we can break our AMPscript once again, and we can put our tr function to start our row. And once we've started our row, we're going to have to cycle through the 3 or 4 columns in our code. So with our tr enabled, we can then restart our AMPscript. Oops, restart our AMPscript properly, of course. And we can close it again before we open up our next function. So in our current AMPscript, we're going to have to cycle through each of the 4 columns in each of these rows. Now, because there's only 3 in this one, but there is going to be 4 in the final one. We have origin, destination, price, and the per bag surcharge. So next we're going to do a cycle through again, this time cycling through not the I, let's make this one C, the column. So for the 3 columns, from 1 to 4 columns, we're going to cycle through and do what? Well, inside of these columns, we are going to want each of the TDs, each of the cells of our table. Now, inside of the cells of these tables, we are going to output the field row value that we come across as we cycle through each of those columns. So we can use our field function here, copy this, and go back up onto our TD section here and start an inline AMPscript with %% equals str function equals %%. Now our field row function here will be looking up our rows as we were before, but the row number won't be row 1 because we're cycling through our rows. So instead we can use @I, our row cycling integer here. As for the column to reference, well again we're cycling through our columns with @C, so our column reference can be @C. That should now print out the field row value of the row we're on dynamically, and the column we're in dynamically. When it prints that out, of course, we then have to end this for loop. So once again, we'll start and close our AMPscript code block here. And we're going to put the next function. That's going to be next C. So we start our for loop for C, close our for loop for C within this row. Once, of course, those columns have been cycled through, we then complete our row, closing out our row function. And then, of course, we're going to go through and reopen our AMPscript to then close off the for loop for our I, which is of course our rows. Now with that done, we can also close out that data there, and it looks pretty good. So we're going to be cycling through our rows, printing out each row in our table. When it's all done, we'll close off our table, and there's nothing else to output. So with all that done, let's try it out for ourselves by saving it and running it on our cloud page. Go save and F5 to run. Beautiful. So we have our origin, destination, and price. 100, 200, 500, and 25 surcharge. How close are we? 100, 200, 500, and 25. Perfect. So we now have a working AMPscript code block, which allows us to recreate the table presented in the documentation on the Salesforce Marketing Cloud website for BuildRowSetFromJSON, which is pretty cool. But unfortunately, most marketers probably won't use this code set because most marketers won't need to use a static set of flight data in their emails or landing pages. So we'll spend some time now having a look at the second ordinal of our function here, the XPath code. Now this code here is what's used to create the expression to address where to start our row set build from. Let's try out now some other sample JSON payloads so we can recreate this expression to address any JSON payloads you may experience when you use this code. Now I have found some great sample code by jumping onto the internet, and I've found javatpoint.com, which contains some very nice JSON examples here. We'll jump in and get example number 1. We can see here employees with 3 rows of employees. Perfect. Grab this code and jump back onto our cloud page. We can replace our flight data now with our brand new employee data. As before, just going to clean it up so it's a bit easier to read. Just like that. So with our brand new code set, we also have to use the JSONPath to identify where to start our rows from. Now, likely for us, it's very similar to our flight data, so we can probably replace the word employees with the flights value just like that, and use, of course, the same address. However, we have one more trick up our sleeve too. If we jump back onto our Salesforce documentation, we can scroll down and see that we are using the JSONPath specification set up by this document here. You can click that link and jump onto our XPath for JSON documentation. You can see some good documentation that helps us to address how we use this expression. You can see here some of the parameters that can be used and some examples of its use below. Again, very helpful for learning. That's too much information though. You can use a website tool to do it for you. I found this website, which is the JSONPath.com, which allows you to use, similar to a regex online tool, a way to identify what the address is that you're trying to use for your expression. We have some sample code here, but for our example, let's jump back onto that JSON page, copy our sample JSON, jump back into our JSON path, and try and address the correct address here live online. Now, of course, we know it's employees, not phone numbers, so we could drop that off our path just like that. Gets the entire results back, but we want just the employees results. Paste employees, and there is our code set. Now, as we know from documentation though, it's also good to address the subset of it, which they've done here with the flights and then the asterisks inside of the square brackets. That, of course, being done operates those chart operators using the wildcard for all objects. So back onto our path, we can say square bracket, use our star, and that addresses all the functions within. And there is our rows, 1 row, 2 row, 3 row, perfect. So that's definitely going to be the expression that we use for our JSON path. I can copy that code, go back to my cloud page now, and paste it into my expression just like that. Now with that, we're ready to go with our 1, 2, 3 rows. These 3 rows only have 1, 2 ordinals in each, or 1 or 2 values in each. So we don't need 4 like we had before. We just want the name, and we want the email. And then we can drop off the rest, just like that. We're not counting to 4 as before, we're just going to count to 2, but we'll still count through all the rows, which there of course should be 3. With that done, let's try writing it for ourselves by going save, and then we can go in and refresh our cloud page. And hopefully we see 1, 2, 3, perfect, and that's looking just like our JSON example. Yes it is, looking good, perfect. Alright, but maybe that JSON was a bit too easy, and the JSON payloads you may be receiving in your actual use cases may be a bit more complex. So we'll scroll down and we'll try out JSON example number 2. Now, as before, we can copy our JSON code and try and find out what the path will be by jumping into our online tool, pasting our code in, and we can use this to find our reference point. Now, straight away, it's going to be a little bit different to before. We've got a few more levels to traverse. This one's going to be within our menu, within our pop-up, within our menu item. So let's try it out for ourselves. We can probably keep the front part, which was the first address, which of course will be menu as our first address. But within menu, we need our next context down, which is going to be pop-up. So according to our syntax here, we can jump back to our XPath. To address the next object down, we can use a full stop. So we'll go back onto our example here. We'll say menu dot, and what's below menu? Well, we're going to want the pop-up. So menu dot pop-up. Good, that's our next group here. Under pop-up, we have what? Well, it's menu items, our next area. So menu dot pop-up dot menu item. Looking good, but there's still one square bracket too many, so we go square bracket star square bracket, and perfect. There's our 3 rows again, 1, 2, and 3. So with that done, let's copy our JSON payload. We'll go back into our AMPscript code block. We'll paste our new code value in. We'll also go back onto our page and get that expression once more. Let's paste that into our expression section here. And we'll clean up our code once more just to make sure it looks nice and neat on our page. Perfect. I do like some neat code. It's so much easier to read when it's all on one line just like that. Perfect. That done, let's go save and rerun our page. There we are. So new, open and save, create, open and save. That's what the examples were. Create, open and save, new, open, save. Looking good. And just a point of order as well, while I do enjoy having my code on one line, you can have it on multiple lines as well in AMPscript. If I Control Z and go back to my multi-line expression here for this JSON payload, I can still save this page, and because the AMPscript code allows us to have our single opening quote here and here, whatever's within, we treat it as that string. So it has saved. I can go back on my cloud page here, refresh my cloud page, and it will still render the results just like that. Test it out by making create doc A, B, and C to make sure it's some new code. I'll go save. And we can still have, of course, the multi-line JSON payload just like that. And that'll do it for this walkthrough of the BuildRowSetFromJSON AMPscript function. I'll put all the code that I've used today onto my GitHub, and I'll link it in the description below so you can try it out for yourself. A huge shout out to the Salesforce engineer team who brought the AMPscript JSON rendering to AMPscript, bringing it in line with GTL and SSJS. A huge thanks for your efforts. If you enjoyed today's video, then please let me know in the comments below with a big thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you'll be notified when I release more Salesforce Marketing Cloud content.